Hi English 9 and welcome to another edition of Shakespeare 101. Today we'll be discussing the background for Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, one of his comedy plays. This comedy is thought to have been written between 1596 and 1598. It is uncertain, for writing is uncertain. Publication scholars suggest that it was originally published in one of the folios in 1598. The play is set in Venice, Italy, and it also travels to Belmont, Italy, and it revolves around the story of several characters who deal with cultural conflicts, the idea of obeying your parents, and love. And since it is a comedy, it means nobody dies, but it does present ideas that don't necessarily belong with a comedy. The story presents the reader or the audience with a very large conflict from the time of Europe, and that would be the cultural conflict between Jews and Christians. By the time Shakespeare worked on this play, Jewish people had been expelled from England. That doesn't mean they were all gone, but they had been expelled from England. And Shakespeare presents this conflict between two characters, Antonio and Shylock, in his play, where Antonio is a wealthy merchant in Venice, and for his friend Bassanio, he borrows money from a Jewish moneylender named Shylock. And Jews and Christians did not get along at this time, and that hatred between Antonio and Shylock is very evident in the play, as you will see. And to go along with that, that plot progresses throughout the entire story until the very end, whenever a price must be paid for borrowing money. And the borrowing of money during Shakespeare's time was seen as a negative thing, but it still did occur. Another plot in the story is that of Portia. Portia is a wealthy woman in Italy, in Belmont. We traveled away from Venice to get to her. And she is bound by her father's rule in terms of she cannot choose her own husband. And Bassanio, Antonio's friend, would woo and marry Portia, but he must pass her father's test first. There are also subplots within this play that revolve around some of Portia's friends and Bassanio's friends, as well as the comic relief in the play, which we'll talk more about later, in the form of a clown named Gobbo. The play is classified as comedy, as I've said, but as you read and as we perform it in class, you'll notice that there are aspects of this play that don't quite fit the comical scheme of things. And that has to deal with Shylock and Antonio and their deal to borrow money. This play was performed first in 1598, so later on in Shakespeare's life it was first performed. The influence for this story comes from Italian folk stories. Shakespeare was influenced by many things when he wrote. Some of his plays are direct, interpretations of other stories or other pieces of ancient writing or older writing. The Merchant of Venice happens to be based off of some old Italian folk stories. And we will talk about the language as we start to read. We will start discussing the language of Shakespeare. But what you need to remember is that there are several little plots in this story. It's not just one, there are a few. And you also need to remember the themes and the motifs that we discussed in class of the hatred cycle and the law and mercy. And Portia, go along with Portia's idea of filial piety, obeying your parent. So keep all of these things in mind as we read, and I will be providing you with a little bit more background on the setting and little instances in the play. The setting of Venice is very interesting because Venice is, of course, this beautiful city built on the water on the eastern coast of Italy, and it has a canal system where you can take the gondola rides with the men in the striped shirts and the hats and go through the town, or you can walk around the streets of Venice. The interpretations of this play over time have changed. The play is labeled as a comedy, as I have said, but sometimes whenever it has been produced on a stage, the characters don't appear as comical as they do on the page. For instance, Shylock, as a Jewish person, he's generally denoted wearing red, He is also sometimes seen as a villain, like they portray him as a villain. In other cases, they portrayed him like a clown, as a foolish person. They present Antonio in a specific way that he's not necessarily at the forefront of the play. It is called The Merchant of Venice, and Antonio is that merchant, but in some cases, it doesn't seem like he's the primary person you're supposed to be paying attention to. It makes it more about Shylock, or it makes it more about Portia and Bassanio. So those are some other things that you need to keep in mind. Again, as we keep going with this, the next video or the next few videos will deal with like specific instances in the story that you need to keep in mind, and language. The language is going to be the challenge here because it is written in early modern, if you will, English. It's not what you and I speak today, so we'll be tackling that obstacle as well as the verse form, because some of the characters, the way they speak is very intricate and detailed in how he places his words and the wordplay he uses. So these are all things to keep in mind. Okay, so until the next video, enjoy.